Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Raised by the Boxtrolls? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The rain had been falling since dusk, a soft drizzle that clung to the cracked sidewalks and turned the broken streetlights into blurs of yellow. Narrow alleys choked with litter and forgotten things stretched like veins off the main road, their darkness swallowing sound. It was late enough that the neighborhood had stilled, the voices of workers and vendors silenced, leaving only the hush of rainfall and the whisper of tires hissing past on wet pavement. A small boy sat trembling in the crook of an old doorway. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old, barely old enough to form sentences, too young to understand why his tiny hands now grasped at empty air. His mop of messy green hair was plastered to his forehead, his cheeks damp with both water and tears. Emerald eyes, wide and confused, searched the night as if the shadows might return the one person he knew would never come back. Izuku Midoriya was alone. Hours before, Inko Midoriya had stood staring down at her son, her hands shaking as she adjusted the folds of his worn little sweater. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. She had convinced herself this was mercy, that leaving him here, no longer her burden, meant he might find someone kinder, someone stronger, to raise him. A world where quirks defined worth had left her terrified of the child she loved. The child who, at his tender age, doctors whispered might be quirkless, after an X-ray was taken of his once broken foot revealed 2 joints in his pinky toe, and the twisted fear of her own inadequacy and shame, she had convinced herself that disappearing was the best gift she could give him. She had placed him on the step, kissed his hair once, and walked away without looking back. The sound of her retreating footsteps had echoed against the walls, each one in absence carving itself into his heart. And then she was gone. Now, little Izuku whimpered, clutching a soggy piece of blanket that was his only comfort. The rain had grown colder. Each drop seemed intent on reminding him of the warmth that had slipped from his grasp. Though his mind was too young to fully grasp abandonment, he knew something was wrong. He knew Mama should have been there to hold him when shadows pressed close around him. Instead, all he had was the thrum of rain and the quiver of shadows that seemed to stretch their fingers toward him. Unseen, beyond the flicker of the dead streetlight, something stirred. Eyes. Round, luminous shapes glinting faintly as they blinked from within the refuse of the alley. Cardboard shifted. Wood creaked as if boxes themselves shifted closer in the gloom. A pair of smaller eyes appeared beside a larger pair, and then another, curious and cautious. A low, warbling murmur that was not quite language bubbled in the stillness, like pebbles rolling down glass. The child's crying had drawn them. Izuku, sniffling, hiccuped softly, his green eyes darting toward that sound. Too scared to flee, too young to resist curiosity, his whimper faded into silence as he peered through tears. He thought he saw a shape square, jagged like a walking box. Then another behind it. Shadows carried them, box-shaped silhouettes slipping closer with delicate care, as if wary of being seen. The boy's lips trembled. "Damang-ma," he whispered, though he did not lift his voice. He was hopeful, still clinging to the last shred of belief that the familiar warmth might return. But what shuffled closer was not his mother. What moved in the darkness was stranger, rougher, yet not cruel. Gentle murmurs traded between them, and a thin, clawed hand hesitated on the edge of the alley wall. They peered at the small, shivering child in the rain, their curious faces half hidden inside the safety of battered boxes. The Boxtrolls had found him. The night grew heavier, but so too did the watchful eyes. The city above carried on in ignorance, blind to the quiet discovery unfolding beneath its lamps. For Izuku Midoriya, barely 2 years old, the world had just veered onto a path his mother could never have imagined, and one shaped hands not human, but kind all the same. And as the rain continued in its thin, steady drizzle now, sliding down the cracks in the walls and dripping into the alley where the boy sat huddled, Izuku's small body shook from the chill, his damp curls clinging to his face as he whimpered softly to himself. Every sound seemed louder in the silence: the pattering rain, the creak of warped buildings, the faint rumble of far-off thunder. But there was another sound, one he didn't understand. A scraping on stone. The shuffle of boxes dragged across the wet pavement. His teary eyes widened when something moved just behind the cluttered trash bins. At first, his young mind believed it was a monster. Large square shadows shifted in a way that boxes shouldn't. They tottered closer, slow and stumbling, like shy figures learning how to walk. The shadows whispered not words, exactly, but soft, garbled murmurs that blended tones like gravel tumbling in water. Izuku shrank back against the wall, clutching his blanket tighter. Fear kept him frozen, but something about the sounds, so oddly gentle, lessened the sting of terror. The boxes moved cautiously, never stepping too close too quickly, as though they too were wary of frightening the small, trembling child. One shape stopped under the faint glow of a flickering streetlight. The box was crudely patched with labels from food tins and scrawled paint that had long since faded. From the neck of the opening peeked a wiry gray hand, spindly fingers flexing nervously at its side. Then a face appeared, peering out from the rim of that box, bulbous eyes, wide and unsure, with an expression not of cruelty, but of concern. Izuku gasped and clutched tighter to his blanket, a small squeak escaping his lips. The creature froze at the sound, flinching as though it feared his cry like thunder. For a long moment, boy and creature stared at each other, green eyes locked to brownish gold, innocence suspended in fear. Then the smallest thing shifted between them. The creature moved its hand, slowly pressing it over its own chest. It gave an almost comical, guttural sound. Fish! The sound startled Izuku, but it also distracted him from his tears. Fish? He whispered softly, his tiny voice echoing. The creature blinked and nodded enthusiastically, tapping its chest again. Fish, it repeated, this time with certainty, as though reclaiming the name proudly. Another box stirred nearby, sliding awkwardly into view. This one was shorter, with colors painted crudely across its sides. Its face appeared next, rounder, younger, with bright, eager eyes. It gave another sound, lighter and higher-pitched. Shoes. The little boy blinked again, the tension in his face softening. Something fragile, unfamiliar, rippled through him, something like laughter threatening to break through his tears. Fish, seeing the shift, tilted his head and made a soft, warbling hum, like a low lullaby drawn from the depths of a cave. He moved closer, one careful step at a time. When he extended one thin arm forward, his long, rough fingers trembled against the wet air. Izuku whined at first, pulling back. His instincts screamed to be careful. But as the rain numbed his tiny hands and the cold stole his strength, his gaze clung to those wide, expressive eyes. He saw no anger there. No greed. Just kindness. Tentative, crooked, and strange, but kindness all the same. With a quivering breath, Izuku released the death grip on his small blanket and allowed one hand to reach out. His palm pressed against those spindly fingers. Fish inhaled sharply, a surprised grunt echoing as though this simple act was unthinkably precious. Then his long arms scooped Izuku carefully from the wet ground, cradling him close against the rough, warm cardboard of his box. For the first time that night, Izuku rested his head on something other than stone. The other trolls closed their circle around Fish and the boy, stealing furtive glances down the empty alley. Their bodies hunched, ready to scuttle back into the underworld from whence they came. Fish whispered something guttural, and they nodded in unison. The child clung tightly to Fish as the Boxtrolls retreated into the shadows. The alley swallowed them whole. They disappeared beneath a loose metal grate, down into the moist, twisting sewers below where the thunderous world above would not find them. Izuku's tears had slowed by then. His eyes drooped with exhaustion as the strange murmurings of the Boxtrolls echoed like a lullaby in the tunnels. Nestled against Fish's chest, his final word before sleep slipped out in the smallest whisper. Fish. And deep in those shadowed tunnels, among the boxes and flickering lanterns, a forgotten boy found a new family. Though the underground world smelled of damp stone and old wood, a mix of rusting bolts, wet cardboard, and the faint sweetness of fruit rinds scavenged from above. It was home to the trolls, a secret labyrinth, built patchwork from forgotten gears, crumbling brick walls, and the endless ingenuity of its odd inhabitants. Lanterns made from glass bottles swung gently from pipes, casting wobbly circles of light across the cavern's floor. Fish carried little Izuku carefully through the maze-like tunnels, constantly adjusting his awkward, box-shaped body so the child wouldn't slip. The other trolls shuffled nearby, their mismatched sizes creating a strange but comforting escort. They murmured in their gravel-rolling voices, as if debating among themselves what, exactly, they had just picked up from the streets above. When Fish lowered the boy onto a nest of patched blankets and soft scraps of paper, Izuku stirred awake. His wide green eyes darted about, confusion replacing sleep. The world here was strange, warm in light but alien in smell and sound. His lip trembled, and just as the first whimper began to rise, Fish squatted in front of him. The troll's large eyes blinked rapidly, and he let out a soft, silly gurgle, "Brrblbly, up." Izuku sniffled, staring. Then, to Fish's delight, the boy let out a tiny giggle. Shoes, the smaller troll, popped up beside him, waving a broken toy spring like it was treasure. He squealed out his name again, "Shuz," bouncing as if trying to perform. The spring slipped from his grasp and sprang wildly into a pile of boxes, startling both trolls. The resulting squawk from another troll buried beneath the heap sent Izuku into a fit of laughter. His first true laugh since being abandoned. The Boxtrolls stilled. Then, slowly, their own grumbling chuckles echoed around the cavern, muttering joy that wasn't quite words but was rich enough in tone to carry their meaning. But their joy faded as a more pressing issue emerged. What on earth were they supposed to feed him? Fish scratched at the rim of his box, tilting his head. One troll proudly presented a shiny bolt he had scavenged, holding it up like a prize. Izuku blinked, tilted his head, and then promptly turned his face away, unimpressed. Another troll scurried back with a cracked boot sole, plopping it down like a feast. Izuku grimaced, the corners of his mouth tightening as though the idea alone was horrifying. Shoes disappeared into a side tunnel and returned dragging a tin full of copper screws. He grinned proudly, shaking it so the screws jangled. Izuku only stared for a second before deciding it was funny to mimic the gesture. He picked up one screw, shoved it near his mouth, and Fish let out a panicked squeal, tossing the screw away in alarm. The trolls erupted into chaos. Trolls dove across the floor to scoop up every last screw, slipping and bumping into one another like clumsy guardians in a single-file panic. Izuku clapped his hands, laughing at the wild scene. It was Shoes, again, who finally solved the mystery by tumbling back with a bruised apple, scavenged from who knows where. The fruit was slightly squashed but still good. When the small boy took a bite, juice dribbling down his chin, the trolls collectively sighed in relief. As the night drifted on, Izuku began exploring his new cavern home with unsteady toddler steps. Each time he wandered too far, Fish's long arms scooped him back up, plopping him gently on a blanket. If Izuku grew tearful, a box troll would find something shiny or clunky, a spoon, a broken cog, a string of beads to distract him. They guarded him clumsily but carefully, wrapping themselves in protective circles every time a drip from the ceiling startled him. When sleep finally overcame the little boy's eyes, Fish watched him curl up into his blanket, breathing soft and even. The box troll tilted his head, his long fingers hovering uncertainly before settling like a shield around the child. The other trolls grew quiet too, falling into their boxes and curling against walls. For years, their lives had been simple scavenging, hiding, and surviving. Tonight, something shifted. Their world had changed, wrapped now around a fragile human child who, for reasons they couldn't explain, felt as though he belonged. And so on Izuku's first night beneath the ground, the box trolls who knew nothing of humans solemnly began teaching themselves what it meant to be a family. Then by morning in the underground, though it was not measured by sunlight. There were no clear skies here, no dawn peeking beyond the horizon. Instead, the rhythm of the Boxtrolls' day came alive by the creak of pipes overhead and the shuffling sounds of boxes stirring awake. Lanterns, cobbled together from scavenged glass jars and flickering candles, cast soft yellow pools of light across the cavern walls. Amid the rustle of cardboard and the low murmurs of the trolls, Izuku stirred. His little frame shifted beneath the blanket nest, his green eyes blinking blearily against the dim, golden glow. His thumb found its way to his mouth, a small comfort in this cavernous strangeness. Yet when he glanced up, the first thing he saw was Fish's face hovering close, blinking slowly as though he had been keeping watch all through the silence of the night. For a heartbeat, Izuku froze. Then the familiarity of those gentle, wide eyes loosened the knot of fear in his chest. He gave a tiny yawn and reached upward, hesitant, but trusting. His small fingers brushed Fish's cheek in a clumsy caress. Something cracked in the troll's odd little chest at that moment. Fish, whose world had been nothing but shadow and gear and survival, leaned into the tiny hand as though it were the first touch of sunlight he'd ever known. A clumsy, guttural hum escaped him, but its tone was not his usual playful warble. It was softer, protective. The other Boxtrolls, meanwhile, began their chaotic routine of trying to care for the little human. Shoes rolled out of his box carrying a bent spoon, offering it like treasure. Another returned with a cracked sippy cup that must have belonged to some child above ground long ago. Izuku studied the items with both curiosity and confusion. He giggled at Shu's triumphant pose, then waved the spoon as though it were a prized toy, sending the trolls into delighted laughter. But while the others found amusement, Fish became steadier in purpose. He took it upon himself to guide and guard the boy at every turn. When Izuku stumbled over a loose gear while toddling around, Fish's long arm flashed out to catch him before he could fall. When the boy grew restless from hunger, Fish searched relentlessly through nooks and piles until he unearthed scraps of fruit or half-loaves discarded by humans. Trolls were scavengers, masters of building from ruins, but now, everything Fish scavenged carried a new weight, a duty to someone far more fragile than himself. Izuku responded to this care with a loyalty only a child could give. When he grew frightened of a sudden clang in the tunnels, he scrambled instinctively toward Fish's legs, pressing his face into the coarse cardboard of Fish's box. When exhaustion pulled him back into slumber, it was always Fish whose shoulder he clung to, even as the troll awkwardly tried to tuck the boy more comfortably. Their bond grew through the smallest of rituals. Fish discovered that Izuku loved to mimic sounds, so he rumbled his name again and again, Fish. Each time, Izuku echoed, laughing when it came out as a high, lopsided Fish. The cave would fill with Izuku's echoing voice and soft laughter, a song no troll had ever heard before. The others took notice too. Whenever Fish's arms were empty, Izuku would wander the cavern, but his green eyes always searched for one figure first. The box with faded labels. The large, patient eyes. The guardian who had lifted him from the rain. That night, as Izuku dozed off once more, Fish rested beside him. His long fingers lingered, gently brushing dirt from the boy's curls, adjusting the blanket around his shoulders. His protective hum filled the cavern, steady as an unspoken promise. In those warm, candlelit shadows, Fish was no longer just a scavenger. He was not merely a creature of forgotten places. No, he was something new. He was father. Izuku, barely old enough to understand what family meant, already trusted him as such, following without hesitation into the tunnels that twisted endlessly, a maze of damp brick, rusted pipes, and glittering refuse. And before Izuku knew it, the underground world had become a place of strange comfort, full of flickering lantern light, playful murmurs, and the steady presence of Fish. But even as laughter and safety took root, some restless part of him remained. His tiny eyes would often lift to the cracks in the ceiling where faint drafts whispered of something more. One evening, Fish carried him along on a scavenging trip. The big troll's gangly arms held Izuku against his chest, the boy nestled in the crook of the warm, rough arms. Their group shuffled through the tunnels until they stopped beneath a metal grate where pale s of light cut through the dark. From above came the sounds of the surface, footsteps ringing on pavement, a bicycle bell, the distant bark of a dog. Izuku stiffened. He had not heard such sounds in weeks, not since the night of the rain and loss. His wide green eyes fixed on the grate, flooding with curiosity. Reaching one hand through the bars, he whispered softly, almost reverently, "Dot up." Fish followed the gesture, blinking. His shoulders hunched instinctively, almost curling protectively around the boy. He let out a soft grumble, low in his chest. Hrum. The noise was serious, weighted, a sound Izuku had come to recognize as warning. But the boy wriggled, pointing again. Up. For a moment, torn between instinct to hide and the fragile trust of the child in his arms, Fish gave in. Step by careful step, he rose up beneath the grate and peered through a crack large enough for them both to glimpse. The surface world was alive. Lantern-lit streets lined with little shops glowed in the twilight. Humans strolled leisurely, carrying parasols or groceries. Children not unlike Izuku ran past, chasing one another, their laughter sharp against the hum of city life. The clean air carried scents that were sharp and rich: sweets, food, flowers. Izuku's breath caught. His tiny fingers curled through the grate as though he might grab hold of the world itself. He gasped at the sound of children's voices, eyes riveted to their motions. "Play," he whispered, reaching. Fish pulled back instinctively. His heart thumped as if danger pressed already at the cavern walls. The other Boxtrolls crowded closer, their low, urgent mutters filling the air. They pointed at the humans above, tapping claws against their boxes in a frantic rhythm. One troll, braver than the rest, mimed soldiers with outstretched arms, pretending to be caught, then slashed across his neck with a dramatic, mournful groan. Izuku flinched, but watched with wide eyes, trying to understand. Fish crouched low again, letting Izuku look into his large brown gaze. With an exaggerated shake of his head, Fish tapped at the grate, then pressed his hand protectively over Izuku's chest. A grunt, "Nu dichon." Slowly, with gestures broad and deliberate, the trolls taught the boy their truth. Humans were danger. Humans searched for them, hunted them, treated them not as creatures but as monsters, mistakes of quirks gone wrong. To be seen was to invite capture, or worse. Izuku's green eyes filled with confusion. He shook his head, whined softly, and wriggled against Fish's hold. His gaze pulled toward the children again, so close yet impossibly far. "Play," he begged faintly, his voice trembling. Fish's long fingers cupped his small face, pulling his attention back down. He pressed his forehead lightly to Izuku's, grunting a slow, steady sound, a protective lull, a father's answer to a question too large for the boy to yet grasp. Izuku whimpered once more, but then, slowly, he buried his face against the troll's box. His small arms curled around Fish's neck, clinging tightly. With relief, Fish carried him away, deeper into the tunnels, the faint glow of the human world fading behind layers of stone and pipe. For Izuku, the glimpse left a permanent mark. The surface meant laughter, children, and sunlight. But for the Boxtrolls, it meant fear, danger, and loss. Between the two, Izuku would have to learn how to exist, both longing for what he could not yet have, and learning to trust the family that would not let him face it alone. The city above bustled as it always had, bright streets filled with neon signs, market stalls glowing late into the night, and the constant hum of voices blending into the rhythm of everyday life. But beneath all that familiarity, unease had begun to take root in whispers. "Something's down there, in the sewers." It had eyes, big glowing ones. "I swear I saw them staring back at me." No, those weren't animals. My buddy swore they were some kind of moving boxes, like a villain's quirk twisted out of control. Every retelling grew wilder. Dock workers murmured of shadows scurrying near storm drains. Vendors spoke of missing scraps and half-eaten fruit baskets left overnight. Stray cats bolted hissing from alleys where shapes shuffled in the dark. To those who knew nothing of what lay beneath, the pattern was simple enough. Something unnatural was lurking underground. And in a city where quirks defined life and law, something unnatural was always assumed to be a villain. At first, it was the civilians who passed the stories from mouth to mouth. Broken silhouettes, guttural whispers, hands that were too long to be human. Then shopkeepers filed reports. Then the rumors reached the police stations and, inevitably, the Hero Commission's desks. By the time the whispers made it into newspapers' small columns tucked on the side of the larger headlines, the words had taken shape. Sewer scuttlers, they were called. Monstrous villainous quirk beasts, rumored to snatch supplies and drag them into the underground. The pro-heroes who read the reports were divided. Some dismissed it as frightened citizens making legends out of shadows. Others furrowed their brows at the mention of children, rumors of strange cries mixed with the monster's sounds. If true, that meant danger of abductions, another reason to send heroes below. One hero in particular took notice. Eraserhead, underground hero Shota Aizawa, leaned against a weathered brick wall in one of the quieter neighborhoods as a patrol spoke nervously to him. His scarf rustled faintly as he glanced toward the open sewer grate at the end of the alley. "Big eyes, huh?" he muttered, his voice dry. "And boxes that walk around on their own." The patrol officer shifted awkwardly. "Normally I wouldn't bother you with superstition, Eraserhead, but people are starting to link it with missing property. Honestly, it's spooking the neighborhoods. Could be just a villain with a transformation quirk hiding down there." Aizawa's gaze dipped to the damp grates glistening with rain. An ache of discomfort stirred in his gut. In his line of work, anything persistent enough to worry civilians even when shrouded in rumor was worth his attention. "I'll look into it," he said simply, tugging his scarf higher as if to seal the promise. As he pressed into the shadows of the alley, the faintest sound drifted up from the drain below. A low, echoing murmur, followed by the tiniest, innocent laugh, softer, human. Aizawa paused mid-step. His black eyes narrowed. Down below, where Fish gently balanced a giggling Izuku on his shoulder as the other Boxtrolls scavenged from a pile of discarded candle stubs, the child's echo carried faintly through the pipes out into the world that was already branding them monsters. And with those whispers spreading faster than fire, the walls between the underworld and the surface were growing thinner by the day. And the laugh faded back into the pipes, swallowed by dripping stone and the dull rush of underground water. But it echoed in Aizawa's ears long after. He stood motionless in the alley, scarf drifting faintly in the salt breeze from the streets. To anyone else, the sound could have been explained away, a trick from echoing storm drains, a cat's distorted yowl. But Aizawa's instincts itched. Years of chasing quirk users who thrived in shadows had honed him to listen closer when others dismissed. He crouched over the grate, hair shading his eyes, listening. A low series of guttural noises carried faintly upward. Heavy, lumbering thuds. Boxes scraping? And softer still, a hushed babble drifting into laughter again. Not an echo. Not a mistake. There was life below. Something or someone was living down there, he murmured, straightening. It wasn't just stolen food and shadows anymore. He tugged his scarf over his shoulders as he turned back into the rooftops. This wasn't a night for busting down manhole covers. One false move would drive whatever it was even deeper underground. The commission would scream for force soon enough, but Aizawa wanted the truth before fists and quirks destroyed it. Beneath the streets, the cavern of the Boxtrolls glowed with stubby candlelight, walls smudged with coal drawings that only vaguely resembled sons, children, or crooked boxes. Holding hands, the trolls cooed and chattered, huddled in small groups as they tugged wires into bundles or hammered broken tins into makeshift toys. Izuku sat high on Fish's shoulders, clapping excitedly as Fish lumbered around in a wide circle. The boy leaned down, tugging affectionately on his protector's thick ears as laughter echoed from deep inside him. Shoes skittered by, proudly offering a cracked plate like a treasure. Fish rumbled approval, letting Izuku pat it with wide eyes of wonder before passing it to the others. In this world of scraps and shadows, these things were gifts. The child's laughter was pure here, safe here. The trolls hummed with him, their guttural chorus low and warm. They thought themselves unseen, hidden from the cruelty of the surface. They didn't know their sounds had risen, drawn ears that were now listening. From the rooftop, Aizawa crouched, surveying the street with patient eyes. The neighborhoods above bustled carelessly, but his gaze never left that single grate. He knew he'd return tomorrow, and the night after. Observation. Patterns first, action later. His thoughts remained hard, focused on duty. The commission's words playing in his mind. Potential threat, unknown quirk, danger to civilians. And yet, even as he reminded himself, doubt gnawed quietly. A hostage screams. That Aizawa could recognize from a mile away. But what he'd heard wasn't a scream. It had been laughter bright, without fear. He told himself there would be answers soon. Down below, Fish rocked Izuku against his chest when the boy grew sleepy, humming deep and steady. The other trolls gathered tight around them, boxes pressed together like a family fortress. They too knew the walls above were growing thinner, but while they feared fire and blades, they couldn't yet sense the one man above who had already begun his watch. The sewers echoed with the usual symphony of scavenging clinking metal, the squelch of boots in shallow water, the muffled grumbles of Boxtroll voices carrying through tunnels. Fish balanced Izuku carefully against his chest, one long arm wrapped around the child while the other rummaged through a pile of discarded market crates. Shoes and two smaller trolls had discovered broken lantern glass half buried in muck, each proudly holding shards that glittered faintly even in the dim light. For Izuku, this had become routine. The dark world of twisting pipes felt like home now, and scavenging felt like family outings. He sat nested in Fish's arms, tiny fingers reaching toward a half-rotten apple one of the trolls triumphantly held aloft. His laughter bubbled, echoing faintly through the tunnel. But that laughter carried farther than Fish realized. Above the sewer grates, a team of pro-heroes in plain gear moved carefully with flashlights sweeping. The Hero Commission had sent them to investigate the rumors of villain quirk creatures lurking in the underworld. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a glowing visor, motioned for silence. Did you hear that? Like a kid laughing. The heroes exchanged glances. Fear hardened into resolve, fueled by the picture painted in rumors. Monsters that lured children into the depths. A heavy iron cover screeched as it was pried away, spilling pale light into the tunnel below. Fish froze instantly, his wide eyes reflecting the glare. Izuku blinked at the intrusion, startled, and then whimpered softly at the sudden brightness. Over there, one hero shouted. I see movement. They've got a child. Flashlight beams swung wildly, and in that instant, the Boxtrolls became exactly what humans feared, crooked shadows with two long arms and two bright eyes cradling a trembling figure. Villains confirmed, barked the visor hero. Go, don't let them escape with the kid. The tunnel erupted into chaos. Fish jerked back sharply, pulling Izuku protectively against his chest as the boy began to cry. The other Boxtrolls panicked, dropping their scavenged treasures in clatters of glass and wood. One let out a guttural screech that echoed against the stone as the group scattered down side passages. Fish! Izuku wailed, voice trembling, not understanding but feeling the danger in every sound. Fish's heart pounded with panic. He pulled the boy tighter, murmuring frantic, soft tones, Echa, baby, his language clumsy but his intention clear. Safe, safe, I'll keep you safe. The heroes dropped into the tunnels, boots splashing against water. They gave chase, beams of light cutting through the labyrinth. Stop. Hand over the child. The Boxtrolls scuttled like crabs, boxes scraping against brick, darting into side tunnels too narrow for humans. Fish sprinted awkwardly, bounding on uneven stone, every movement made heavier by the boy clutching his neck. Water sprayed with each splash of his steps. A rope of capture tape lashed through the air, missing Fish by mere inches. Almost caught one hero shouted. Fish ducked sharply beneath a low arch, his body scraping and bending to fit, panting as he went. The clamoring yells grew fainter as the humans slowed. These tunnels were meant for creatures of cardboard and desperation, not for armored men above ground. When Fish finally slumped against a wall in a darkened alcove, his chest heaving, Izuku was sobbing loudly against him. The boy's tiny fists bunched in Fish's damp box, his cries piercing through the stillness. Fish tilted his head, gently rocking him as his long fingers brushed through the boy's messy hair. He began humming the same soft, rumbling melody he always used when the tunnels grew too silent. His voice vibrated like the whisper of deep stones, steady and soothing. Izuku's cries hiccuped, slowed, then faded into softer whimpers. He hiccuped once, blinking his big, wet eyes looked up at Fish. "Fish," he whispered shakily. Fish's wild heart calmed at that sound. He pressed his forehead gently against the boy's as he always did, murmuring low reassurance. Around them, the other Boxtrolls regrouped, shaken and silent. They had narrowly survived this time. But above-ground eyes had seen them now. The world would not stop whispering. For Izuku, that night became the first time he felt fear clutch his chest so fiercely. But in Fish's arms, swaddled in cardboard warmth and strange, protective hums, he learned something else as well. As long as Fish held him, the fear faded. No matter what chased them, Fish would never let go. Not long after that, the tunnels had quieted after the chaos of the chase. No heroes lingered now, no beams of flashlights hunted the shadows. Only the persistent drip of water from rusted pipes and the low crackle of a scavenged lantern filled the cavern. The Boxtrolls huddled together, still shaken from their brush with the surface world, their guttural murmurs carrying a restless unease. But nestled safely in the crook of Fish's arms, Izuku had stopped crying. His cheeks were tear-stained, his curls damp, yet his wide green eyes sparkled with something innocent, again curiosity. His little hands tugged lightly at Fish's arm before wandering toward the broken gadgets scattered across the cavern floor. Among them lay a battered tin can dented into odd shapes. Izuku picked it up and gave it a shake. The hollow container rang with a metallic rattle. His eyes widened. Again he shook it, giggling at the sound. Fish tilted his head, watching. He rumbled softly, intrigued. The boy, delighted by Fish's attention, shook the can again and squealed in laughter. Then, with a child's natural instinct, he began to beat the can gently with his tiny palm. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was uneven and clumsy but joyous. Fish blinked, then crouched low, picking up an old gear plate from the ground. He tapped it with a long finger clang, clang, clang. The deep sound reverberated through the chamber. Izuku gasped at the echo and clapped. "Again! Again!" he babbled, though the words were broken toddler noises. Fish obliged, tapping rhythmically this time. Clang, clang, clang. Izuku beamed, trying to match the beat on his tin. It came out crooked and rushed, but the effort filled the cavern with a strange harmony. The other Boxtrolls gathered slowly, peeking from their boxes. One brought out a broken bottle and blew across its rim, making a hollow whistle. Another banged 2 wooden scraps together with glee. Soon, the cavern filled with a crude, chaotic orchestra, metallic clangs, soft whistles, and Izuku's high-pitched laugh threading between them. The boy swayed in Fish's lap, mimicking rhythm, tapping on his can and stomping his little feet. His laughter rose higher as Fish leaned close, humming a low, steady tone beneath it all, his voice like stone vibrating through deep caves. The hum carried the rhythm, grounding the noise into something that almost resembled music. Tish! Izuku strained, trying to shape the word through his babbled singing. He drummed his can more furiously, his grin wide. Fish! Fish! The Boxtroll froze for a breath in surprise, then made a delighted chuffing sound, pressing his large hand carefully over his chest. He repeated it proudly, "Fish!" Izuku, thrilled, echoed it again, his chant mixing with his music until it no longer felt like just words, but a celebratory song. From that night forward, the cavern often echoed with their makeshift concerts, Izuku drumming, trolls clapping boxes together, whistles of bottles and clangs of gears under Fish's steady hum. Music became their secret language, their bridge between boy and troll. And as the child giggled under cardboard lantern light, safe in the shadows with rhythm in his heart, Fish felt something he couldn't put into words, a bond stronger than blood, sustained not by fear or scavenging survival, but by a shared song. Far above them, the city carried on unaware. Lanterns had burned low in food stalls, the hum of voices fading as shutters closed and streets emptied for the night. It was past midnight when Aizawa Shota found himself wandering yet another damp neighborhood, scarf trailing silently at his side. Patrol duty suited him, the quiet fit his personality, the shadows gave him cover, and the late hour meant fewer bright-eyed reporters or fans to bother him. He liked it that way. The world above was loud enough without him needing to fill the silence. But even silence had its flaws. Standing on the lip of an alley near a drain, Aizawa closed his eyes for just a moment, feeling the rhythm of the city. A dripping gutter. A cat padding lightly across a groaning trash can lid. The faint hum of a late train in the distance. He had long since trained his senses to pinpoint sounds, to break apart the layers of the city atmosphere. Which was why he noticed it. A faint clang beneath the alley, followed by another. Hollow, uneven. Then lighter taps, almost like small hands pounding on something tinny. Interspersed between them was something stranger. A deep humming sound, low and constant, resonating beneath the surface. It wasn't the hum of machines. No, it almost sounded like a voice. And then, as if to confirm his instincts, the faintest giggle drifted up through the grate. A child's giggle. Aizawa's eyes flicked open. He crouched swiftly by the drain, listening as the sound of makeshift music echoed faint but clear. Tin clatters, wood taps, hollow whistles, all jumbled together in chaotic rhythm. And over it all, the laugh of a boy. So the rumors weren't entirely nonsense, and maybe he hadn't heard entirely wrong the other night. He frowned, brushing stray hair from his eyes. If the reports were right, civilians were already calling them villainous creatures, strange box-shaped shadows rumored to steal food. But this? Music and laughter didn't line up with that kind of malice. He couldn't ignore it either, not when the sound of a child was tangled in the rhythm. Someone or something had a kid down there. Aizawa stood, his scarf dragging as he moved deeper into the alley, tracing the source of the music through side streets. It rose and fell, like waves underground, only clear at certain grates before fading again. Each time he caught the giggle, unfiltered joy carried upward. He paused without realizing why. His brow furrowed in thought. That if it's a villain, they're awfully bad at staying hidden. Some part of him wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to delusions of tired ears, but the memory of news clippings stuck with him. Families whispering that something strange lived underground, merchants complaining of stolen scraps, frightened children claiming to see bright eyes peering from drains. All of it filtered into his instincts, and his instincts rarely failed him. He stopped at one particular grate where the sound rose sharpest. Closing his eyes, listening hard, he almost envisioned the scene below, mismatched clanging, odd guttural murmurs, and a boy's sweet voice chiming over it as though the whole mess were a concert just for them. Aizawa's chest tightened imperceptibly. He could ignore a lot of things on patrol, but not a child's laugh hidden beneath the city, where only danger lurked. He straightened. Once more, tugging his scarf tighter across his shoulders. Slipping into the mouth of the sewer, he crouched now below the rusted grate, adjusting his angle until shadows shifted just so. And there, just beneath the light of a flickering lantern cobbled together from debris, he saw them. 1, 2, 3, 4 crooked shapes half hidden in boxes like living armor. Their hunched bodies moved with a strange gait, arms gangly and too long. And in the arms of the largest one, the child. The boy was nestled against the chest of a troll in a battered box labeled with a fish picture, his curls damp, his little hands fiddling clumsily with a spoon like it were a toy. He was laughing. But when Aizawa first saw the scene, all he registered was the image of a creature clutching a struggling toddler. His chest constricted, legs uncoiling before thought. He dropped lightly from the wall behind them, scarf unraveling in a flash. Put the child down. Fish jerked, round eyes going wide. The other Boxtrolls scattered instantly, squealing guttural sounds that echoed off the cavern walls. Fish's protective hold tightened instinctively around Izuku, who startled at the sudden voice. Fish! Izuku murmured, confused, sensing the tension vibrating in the arms that held him. He buried his face against the cardboard chest. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as his quirk activated, glowing red across his tired, sharp gaze. I said put him down. Now. Fish backed away, emitting a deep, nervous warble. His hands shook, but he didn't release the boy. The box troll turned and bolted, water splashing under his feet. Aizawa leapt after him, scarf whipping out in smooth coils. His cloth lashed through the air, aiming to bind. Fish twisted desperately away, just barely ducking under the strike. Izuku shrieked at the sudden pull, confused and frightened. Hoo-hoo! One Boxtroll's guttural call echoed somewhere in the darkness. They scattered, scraping and clattering boxes against stone as they vanished into tunnels. The chase burned forward. Fish scrambled on all fours now, his ungainly shape bounding over shallow streams and cracked stone. Izuku clutched fiercely in his arms. Aizawa pursued silently, steps measured, stalking like a predator. Izuku's cries pierced the chase, small fists gripping Fish's collar. Fish! Fish! The boy wasn't crying for help from the man behind them, he was crying for the troll that carried him. Aizawa faltered for just a heartbeat. A child calling a creature like that, like he was calling his father? He ground his teeth and surged forward, scarf lashing again. You're not keeping him. Fish scrambled into a narrower passage, his long arms clinging to the boy's frame as though he could shield him with his whole awkward body. Breaths came ragged and fast through guttural hums, low, desperate. The grates behind them reopened to silence until finally, after a frantic sprint through twisting tunnels, Fish and Izuku slipped into a hidden chute barely wide enough for their box-shaped bodies. The scarf flashed behind them, barely missing Izuku's ankle before Fish fully disappeared into the narrow crawl space, gone into deeper shadow. Aizawa landed hard, scarf retracting, chest heaving. He stood there in the stink and dim lantern glow, jaw tight, staring at the space where they had vanished. A child's voice still echoed in the dark. Fish! It was not a cry of fear. It was love. Aizawa straightened slowly, eyes narrowing in the dim. The facts didn't line up, but his instincts were louder. Whatever it was, whoever those box creatures were, they had a child. And he was going to bring the boy back. The tunnels were chaos. Boxtrolls darted through crooked passageways, boxes scraping loudly against stone as they skittered into the dark. Their guttural murmurs rose and fell in frantic, overlapping rhythms, filled with panic and disbelief. They huddled deep in an alcove hidden by collapsed brick and thick pipes, whispering, shaking their clawed hands as if to fling away the fear that clung to them. One troll slapped the side of his box dramatically, his sounds sharp and angry. Another rolled in circles, muttering gibberish like a prayer against the intrusion. Every one of them had seen the shadow of the man above, hair wild, eyes burning red, and had known instinctively what he was. A hero. The kind that hunted creatures like them. In the middle of the chaos, Fish sank against the wall, Izuku trembling in his arms. The boy was crying openly now, his small fists curled tight against Fish's chest. His cheeks were blotchy red, his voice high and broken. Fish. Fish, scary. Fish's large hands trembled. His wide eyes reflected the dim lantern, filled with their own kind of fear. He'd been reckless, letting the man with the scarf see them, and now the others looked to him as though he'd brought ruin into their world. But when Izuku's words cut through the panicked noise, the sobs of the child who had trusted him, Fish's instinct to collapse buckled into something steadier. With one deep breath, the troll shifted. He lowered onto his knees, cradling the boy close until Izuku's screaming slowly became hiccups. Fish rocked gently, long arms swaying in rhythm. His chest vibrated with the same low hum that had comforted the boy before. Safe, safe, safe. At first, the boy resisted. He clutched desperately, shaking his head, eyes still darting into the shadows as if the man's glowing gaze lingered there. But the hum was patient, gentle. It wove through the cavern like a lullaby drawn from deep stone, steady and calming. Izuku's breath hitched, slowed, then softened. His head drooped against Fish's shoulder, curls damp against cardboard. His tears stained Fish's rough box, but his tiny hands unclenched, finding their way beneath the troll's chin where they simply held on. Fish, he whispered again, quieter this time. Not terrified. Just tired. Fish's eyes softened. He pressed his broad forehead gently against the boy's, the gesture becoming his silent promise. No matter who comes, I'll protect you. The other Boxtrolls, still restless and wild, circled closer. Their guttural language shifted in tone, less frantic, more hushed. They looked to Fish, to Izuku's small head rising and falling with each shaky breath, and saw with their own eyes what had already become clear. He wasn't just a scavenged child. He was theirs. And now, more than ever, they knew the world above would never stop hunting them, but for Izuku, they would scuttle deeper, hide sharper, and protect stronger. in the shadows of the underground, would keep him close. But soon the sewers, for all their dripping walls and rusty pipes, had grown quieter since the night of the chase. The Boxtrolls moved with extra caution now, glancing nervously at every grate they passed, their boxes scraping less noisily as they learned the importance of silence. Fear had lingered heavy in their stubby bodies, making them jump at every echo, every drip of water from above. But Izuku was different. Where the trolls saw threat, he saw home. Where they felt hunted, he felt safe in the presence of his strange guardians. And without truly meaning to, the little boy carried with him a kind of light that softened the jagged edges of their worry. That morning, or what passed for morning underground, Fish found Izuku tugging at a discarded lump of coal the trolls had collected. The soot clung to his tiny hands as he smeared it across the stone floor. At first, Fish panicked, murmuring sharply as he tried to pull it away. The child's hands were messy enough without black stains covering every finger. But Izuku shook his head stubbornly, clutching the coal. "Draw, Fish, draw." Fish tilted his head, confused. The boy dropped immediately to the floor and began dragging his little hand across the stone, leaving thick black streaks. Shoes quickly scampered over, curious, muttering excitedly as he pointed and grabbed another piece of coal. Izuku giggled and kept scribbling, smearing wide loops and crude shapes. Soon the floor of the cavern bloomed with wild lines. He lifted one hand proudly, palm now stained pitch black, and slammed it against the wall with toddler force. A perfect black handprint stuck to the stone. Izuku squealed in triumph. "Fish," he chirped, turning, eyes shining with pride. He pointed at the handprint. "Izuku." His voice lilted, the first time he clumsily paired his name with his creation. Fish stared at the small imprint for a long moment, this tiny, fragile mark in a vast, cold cavern. Slowly, carefully, he reached for a chunk of coal himself. Clawed fingers pressed awkwardly against the stone, leaving a much bigger, jagged handprint beside Izuku's. Izuku gasped. Then, with a laugh so bright it echoed up pipes and tunnels, he clapped his messy black hands. "Fish. Izuku. Same." The box troll flinched at the sound, same, a word simple but powerful, one even these creatures could grasp from tone and gesture. Their small boy was saying they belonged together. Soon the others joined in. One troll slapped a three-fingered smear above the first prints. Another dragged crooked box edges across the floor to leave faint markings. Within an hour, the walls of that hidden alcove bloomed with messy coal paintings, smudges, circles, crooked figures that looked like boxes with arms. In the middle of it all, Izuku grinned with soot spilling across his cheeks, face glowing like the lanterns overhead. When he crawled back into Fish's lap, smudging the troll's chest with little black handprints, there was no panic in the room. No thought of heroes or hunters. Only giggling breath, rough chuckles, and the sound of cardboard shifting as the trolls clapped together in their odd little way of cheering. Izuku wriggled closer into Fish's chest, his voice muffled but firm with childlike certainty. "Family." Fish's arms wrapped around him tighter, forehead pressing to the boy's crown. His low rumble vibrated like a vow. The Boxtrolls, for all their fear of the world above, felt it too. For a fleeting, perfect moment, everything else slipped away. Their little human had not just learned to draw. He had reminded them all that love was louder than fear. All the while the city was loud with rumor, but underground the truth whispered quieter than most cared to hear. From the shadows of another rain-slicked alley, Aizawa jumped into the sewer just like before as he crouched silently beneath the open grate. His scarf shifted faintly, coiled loosely in his hand as he peered down into the dark. It had taken days of careful watching, tracking rumors and following noises heard during patrols, but he had finally found it again, the faint flicker of light, the distant echo of sounds that did not belong to vermin. Clatters, murmurs, and tonight, laughter. The sound of a child. Aizawa kept his eyes narrowed, tired gaze scanning every movement below. Lanterns cobbled together flickered inside the cavern, and within them the strange box creatures bustled about like some parody of a community. They moved awkwardly, clumsy and guttural, but not aimless. Not tonight. His eyes focused, unblinking, on the largest one, the same figure from before. the one with the battered crate-marked fish, carried the boy just as before. But what he saw next brought pause to even his seasoned instincts. The boy wasn't writhing to get away. He wasn't terrified. He was smiling, cheeks smudged with soot, tiny hands pattering rhythmically against the troll's box as if playing a drum. The creature fish hummed low in response, a steady tone that caused the boy to erupt into laughter. Aizawa's jaw tensed. This wasn't right. Villains who kidnapped children didn't cradle them like glass. They didn't rock them back and forth with the patience of a parent. They didn't. He stopped his thoughts sharply. Confusion clouded judgment. Whatever his eyes showed, the facts remained. Monsters were living in the sewers with a human child in their arms. Whether or not the boy had grown comfortable with them didn't erase the danger. Still, against his better judgment, Aizawa lingered. He watched as one of the box creatures brought the boy a chunk of half-crushed fruit. The troll offered it clumsily, retreating almost shyly when the child took it with a bright, "Thank you," lisped through half-spoken words. Izuku sat cross-legged on a blanket of rags, happily eating, while the trolls gathered close in something that resembled pride. Aizawa's sharp eyes caught another detail. The walls nearby were covered in smudges of cold tiny handprints, crooked markings, childish drawings mingled with larger hand-shaped prints clearly not human. He tilted his head slightly, dark hair falling into his face. They weren't just hiding with a stolen child, they were living with him. Raising him, in their own strange way. Aizawa exhaled slowly, lips a firm line. For a flicker of a moment, he remembered his own youth, lonely, hardened too early, misunderstood even when he tried to do right. That memory sat sour in his chest as he looked at the boy pressing his tiny hand into the palm of the troll, both clutching each other like lifelines. "You don't belong down there, kid," Aizawa whispered under his breath, voice rough. His black eyes hardened again, returning to duty. No matter how gentle they act, one day they'll slip. A place like that isn't safe for a child. He rose to his feet, scarf trailing as he vanished back into the darkness of the alley. He told himself the clarity was simple: the creatures were hiding a child, and that meant danger. But the flicker of laughter that trailed after him from the grate below lingered stubbornly in his mind, sharper than any report or rumor. Word of the sewer scuttlers, soon carried farther though, farther than rumor-filled bars and police reports. Shadows in the underworld of the city had begun to listen, too, and in that underworld, rumors were currency. In a shuttered warehouse by the docks, 3 men huddled around a splintered table. Their voices were low, crackling with amusement and greed. "I'm telling you, I saw it with my own eyes," hissed one of them, a wiry man with crooked teeth and a quirk that made his fingertips glow faintly like hot coals. Big ugly boxes walking around like they were alive. "Some kind of mutation quirk, guaranteed. Or some underground experiment gone rogue," grunted the bigger man, slamming a bottle down for emphasis. His quirk let him harden bone plates across his arms, so his threats had weight. Doesn't matter what if it's down there, it's feral. And feral can be caught. Might be worth something to the right buyer. The third, slimmer and sharper-eyed than the others, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "The commission thinks they're villains? Well, maybe they are, maybe they ain't. But if they're hiding, they're vulnerable. Strange quirks fetch a lot in the black market, same with rare beasts." His grin widened, glittering with malice. "Hell, people pay triple for quirks you can chain." The coal-fingered man snickered, then tossed in the final hook. "And you know what else? Heard one of 'em was carrying a kid. Fragile, human. That means they've gotten soft. Easier to grab. Easier to sell." The room fell into silence, the flick of a match lighting a cigarette punctuating the stillness. When the smoke curled upward, the big one grunted. "Then we find 'em." They pushed their chairs back, already planning routes into the sewers, tools clanging as they gathered jagged nets and iron cages. They had no idea what the Boxtrolls truly were, no interest in innocence or family. To them, the trolls were a payday. A chance to haul something strange out of the dark and chain it up for coin. And worse, if there truly was a child among them, he too could be bait. Above ground, rumors birthed suspicion. Heroes believed they were protecting the people. But in the shadows, villains smelled profit, and that made them far more dangerous. Deep below, unaware of the plans brewing overhead, Izuku giggled as he teased Shoes with a string of beads, tugging until the smaller troll flopped dramatically to the floor. The cavern echoed with laughter again. But outside their box-made home, the walls of the world were beginning to close in. Heroes watched from above. Villains plotted in the dark. And the fragile family, clinging desperately to each other in the sewers, had no idea that the danger beneath the city no longer came only from misunderstanding, but from malice. Down below, life carried on in its quiet rhythm. In the dim tunnels, danger felt like something distant, a rumor carried through pipes and shadows. The small echoes of laughter were stubborn things, refusing to die even as the darkness pressed closer. The sewers were never silent, but tonight the echo of dripping water carried an extra weight. Fish's ears twitched, uneasy, though Izuku was happily humming from his perch on the troll's shoulders. The boy swayed side to side, tiny hands tugging at Fish's box rim like reins on a horse, giggling at the silly game. Shoes scuttled behind them, dragging a shiny saucepan like newfound treasure, while two other smaller Boxtrolls played tug-of-war over a bent pipe. Life underground often returned to this rhythm: scavenge, play, survive. But Fish's eyes flicked warily toward every shadow. Something felt wrong. They weren't the only ones in the sewers tonight. From deeper in the pipe system, nets slithered across the ground like metallic snakes. Heavy boots splashed into shallow water, and gruff voices echoed faintly. Spread out. They'll be close. Remember, the little ones, the leverage, grab him first. Fish stiffened. A guttural alarm trill vibrated deep in his chest. The Boxtrolls froze. Izuku tilted his head curiously at the sound, only to be snatched suddenly into Fish's arms again. His small fingers clung nervously to his protector's collar as the trolls scrambled back into a defensive huddle. The ambush fell quickly. Nets slammed down from above, iron frames clattering closed around one of the younger trolls. He squealed, clawing at the bars, his box scraping against the stone. Another spear-like pole jabbed toward Fish, aiming for his arms, aiming for Izuku. Got him. Bring the cages, hurry, one villain barked. Fish leapt back with surprising agility, box edges dragging against the wall. He clutched Izuku tightly, his low rumble becoming a growl that no human could mistake for anything but defiance. Shoes darted to his side, teeth bared in his goofy but fearless way. The villains closed in, their boots ringing against damp metal. One swung a chain net overhead, hurling it toward Fish and the child. But before it could land, three trolls moved as one, leaping, biting, and clawing at the chain with their wiry limbs. Another troll scuttled behind and yanked the villain's legs from under him. He crashed hard into the muck. Fish barked a sharp hum, a command. The trolls shifted. For creatures thought mindless, their teamwork was uncanny. One threw scraps of debris, another knocked over a scaffold of pipes, sending a wave of foul water across the walkway. The lantern held by one villain sputtered out, plunging the tunnel into flickering shadows. I can't see, they're everywhere. With child pressed tight against his chest, Fish charged forward, barreling past confused villains. His box took the brunt of chains and hooks, his long arms lashing out to swipe at weapons. The other trolls scuttled after him, forming a living shield around Izuku. But the racket drew more than just villains. Above, patrol heroes had already been circling in suspicion. Hearing the clash below, they descended quickly, flashlights cutting through darkness. Arrived, all they saw was chaos. Monstrous box creatures grappling in the sewer with rough-looking men. Villains fighting over spoils. One hero declared grimly, snapping his wrist to summon a quirk. Looks like they've been squabbling over stolen property and a child. The heroes leapt in, attacks sparking. Nets of light, blasts of force, quirk power flooding the tunnel. The Boxtrolls shrieked, scattering wildly not just from villains now, but from heroes as well. To the outside eye, it looked like one violent mass of villains fighting for scraps. Through it all, Izuku clung to Fish, eyes wide with terror. But even as blasts shook the stone and chains clattered, Fish's humming grew steady. Pressed against the boy's small body, the sound reverberated loud, calming Izuku's sobs even as chaos roared around them. Safe, safe, I won't let go. With a final surge, the trolls collapsed a rotten pipe, water bursting through with force. The surge washed Boots out from under both villains and heroes as the Boxtrolls vanished into a labyrinth of smaller tunnels no human could fit into. Silence returned, save for water dripping back into place. The heroes pulled themselves together, muttering grimly. Whoever they are, they're dangerous. But deeper below, hidden in the safety of their cavern, Izuku lay bundled in Fish's arms, soot-smudged cheeks pressed against his chest. He whimpered softly, then murmured the word that still cracked the silence like sunlight through stone. Fish. And at that sound, the trolls around him trembling, dripping, faces scraped grew quiet. Fear lingered, but Izuku's innocence, his certainty that fish meant safety, steadied them all. For now, they had survived. But the world above would not stay at bay forever. The tunnels dripped and groaned as if mourning with them. The battle's echoes still clung to the stone, the heavy crash of boots, the hiss of quirks, the clanging of cages, but down in the safety of their hidden cavern, there was only silence broken by the ragged sound of panting. The Boxtrolls huddled close, a shivering heap of mismatched cardboard and scarred legs. Some clutched bruises from the fight, smudges of soot and mud assuaged their pale skin. Others picked nervously at their boxes, wide eyes darting toward every shadow as if more humans might burst through the walls. Fish sat at the center, his arms wrapped around Izuku. The boy had cried fiercely at first, shaken by the storm they had fled through, but now his sniffles slowed. His small face pressed into Fish's chest and his fists clutched tightly at the cardboard folds. Exhaustion weighed on him, yet even in his drowsy blinks, he whispered what steadied the trolls around him. Fish. Fish safe. The larger troll stilled, chest thrumming at those words. His long fingers stroked gently across Izuku's soot-stained cheeks until those whispers faded into soft breaths of half-sleep. Shoes, braver than most, scuttled forward and sat against Fish's side. He laid one clawed hand against Izuku's tiny knee as if confirming, "He's here, he's real, we didn't lose him." Soon other trolls pressed closer too until the cavern center became a tangle of boxes stacked protectively around their boy. Together, they breathed. Together, they let the silence fall like a shield. For the first time since they rescued Izuku from the rain, fear pressed through them, not of themselves, but of him. Of losing him. Twice now humans had come for the boy, heroes out of misunderstanding, villains out of greed. Neither had seen love cradled in a troll's arms. Neither cared. All they saw was danger and opportunity. The Boxtrolls muttered among themselves, their voices guttural, sharp at first accusations, fear, questions. But when Izuku stirred faintly in Fish's arms, twitching at the noise, all the mutters softened at once. Their grumbles melted into low hums, a lullaby echoing deep in the chamber. They were trying to promise him peace when their own hearts were breaking. Fish's eyes lingered on the child's face. He pressed his forehead gently to the boy's, his hum deep and tremulous. The truth was heavier than any box they had borne. This couldn't last. Not with hunters above, not with Izuku's world pulling toward the surface. Their underground clan had protected him as best they could. But Izuku wasn't a troll, wasn't born for damp caverns and scavenged scraps. He deserved sunlight. The thought twisted in Fish's chest, painful and bitter. He couldn't imagine putting Izuku back in human arms, not after seeing what those same humans had tried to do. But deep in his wide, gentle gaze, he knew what the others also realized. One day, soon, they would have to choose between clinging to the boy or keeping him safe. For now, they drew tighter instead, their boxes pressed until they resembled a fortress around their fragile child. They would endure together as they always had. But seeds of change had been sown, and no matter how they hushed them, the thought echoed silently through each troll's heart. They might not always have him. But so long as Izuku's tiny voice called for them, so long as he laughed, giggled, and whispered fish in the dark, they would stand together, box upon box, the only family he knew. For now, that was enough. And as the cavern felt heavier in the days after the attack, the Boxtrolls still scavenged, still played their odd little games, still clattered about in their boxes as they always had, but something had changed. It sat quiet, unspoken, in the way they lingered near the shadows of tunnels instead of straying too far. It showed in the mutters that stopped abruptly when Izuku scampered near, or in the sharp glances exchanged when the boy clapped joyfully at something simple. Their laughter came quieter now, and Izuku noticed. At barely 3 years old, there were many things he couldn't understand. He didn't know why humans above looked at his family with fear. He didn't know why men had thrown nets at them, or why heroes shouted with glowing eyes. But what he could understand was tone and expression, and the way his family's low croaks no longer vibrated with safety like before. They were worried, and it frightened him. One night, while Fish rested against the cavern wall, Izuku crawled into his lap with unusually quiet steps. He carried a scrap of stringed beads the trolls had given him, but he didn't play with it. Instead, he curled against Fish's chest and whispered softly, words cracked with toddler worry. "Fish, no go." Fish blinked, startled. He tilted his head, waiting for Izuku to continue. The boy clutched at the rough edges of the troll's box, his wide green eyes shimmering. "Stay, always stay." His lip trembled, the plea outweighing his young voice's strength. Tears began gathering in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks as he repeated it desperately. "Fish, stay. Family, stay. Not leave, baby, don't go." His sobs echoed through the cavern, small and broken. The Boxtrolls froze from every corner, their bodies stiff with shock. It was one thing for them, cowardly and cautious, to whisper about the truth that they might one day have to give him up. But to hear the boy himself, barely beginning to grasp words, beg them not to leave him, that shattered them in an instant. Fish's hands shook as he gathered Izuku up, pressing the small boy into his chest. He hummed, low and shaky at first. Then steadier, louder, his arms curling around Izuku as if he could shield him from even the thought of abandonment. Shoes scuttled closer, trying to pat at Izuku's shoulder clumsily until his small hand was buried beneath claws bigger than himself. Slowly, one by one, the other trolls encircled, creating a cocoon of boxes around the sobbing child. Izuku hiccuped, still trembling, but when he looked up, he saw every pair of wide, odd eyes staring at him not with fear, but with devotion. As if his tears had reminded them of something they already knew, that to him, they weren't strange creatures or monsters. They were his parents, his siblings, his family. Fish tipped his head low until his wide forehead pressed gently against Izuku's crown. His hum deepened, echoing with every troll joining in. The sound vibrated through the cavern like a promise, not just comfort. "We will not leave you. Not now. Not while you need us." Izuku's sniffling softened as the chorus surrounded him. His small eyes blinked wearily, but even as sleep claimed him again, his fists never released Fish's box. His final words, whispered on a sigh, pierced into every troll's heart. "Stay, family." When his breathing grew steady, the trolls exchanged looks. They knew the truth hadn't changed. The surface still hunted them. Izuku couldn't belong here forever. But as their boy slept warm between them, they clenched their claws and bowed their heads. They weren't ready to let him go. Not yet. For now, they would bear the danger. For now, they would keep running, keep hiding, keep protecting. Because where there was Izuku, there was their family. Shota Aizawa was not a man prone to hesitation. Heroes survived through clarity, through the ability to cut through noise and act decisively, even in the strangest of situations. But something about the whispers under this part of the city, the laughter, the music, the contradictory scenes he'd witnessed left him unsettled. It was supposed to be simple. Villains in the sewers. Creatures kidnapping a child. Bring the boy back. And yet, tonight he crouched low along a narrow rooftop, letting the humid evening air cling like a second skin. His tired eyes tracked the faint glow that rose from the storm drains below, the flicker of makeshift lanterns embedded where no lanterns should exist. The noise drifted to him again. Low guttural hums, the faint clang of some scavenged instrument, and the sharp, clear sound of a child laughing. That laugh didn't fit the narrative he kept telling himself. Slipping into the alley, he peered through the grate, letting his gaze adjust to the gloom beneath. There once again, the box creatures gathered. Large, looming, their bodies hunched and clumsy. He could still feel the weight of public fear whispering against his instincts. villainous quirk beasts, monsters in the dark. But then he saw the boy. The child, a tangle of green curls and wide eyes, was giggling uncontrollably as he dragged a lump of coal across the wall, smearing crooked marks into the stone. By his side crouched the largest of the box creatures, the one marked Fish, watching the boy intently. When Izuku lifted his tiny hand to show a messy black palm print, the creature pressed its own massive hand next to his. The wall bore two prints side by side, one small, one monstrously large. Izuku squealed with delight. Aizawa's throat tightened unconsciously. This wasn't the image of a captive child. The boy wasn't cowering or begging for rescue. He was seeking their praise. He was happy. The strange creature bent its forehead down to his, humming softly as the boy leaned in without fear, wrapping his little arms around its chin. The sound that followed was not monstrous, not to anyone truly listening. It was the sound of family. Aizawa exhaled slowly, tension caught between instinct and observation. "What are you?" he muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing. He told himself again that none of this changed the facts. The child wasn't where he belonged. The creatures weren't human, weren't safe, and no amount of strange tenderness they showed could erase the threat they posed to a boy's survival. That child deserved sunlight, safety, a guardian the law could see. But as Izuku laughed again, clapping his coal-stained hands while the trolls grunted happily in response, Aizawa found himself staring too long, his certainty thinning by degrees. Monsters didn't inspire joy like that. Monsters didn't get called family. Straightening, he slipped back into the shadows, pulling his scarf closer against his shoulders. His jaw tightened with the decision still pressing in his chest. "They may care for him," he whispered harshly, trying to steady the fault line in his conviction. "But that doesn't mean they're what he needs." And yet, deep down in the quiet part of him he rarely confronted, the thought lodged like a splinter. If they truly meant harm, why was the boy smiling? The shadows swallowed him again, but the uncertainty followed him all the way home. By the next night the sewers were restless. The sound of rushing water from the upper drains roared louder than usual, masking footsteps and voices. To the Boxtrolls, it should have been the perfect cover for scavenging. They shuffled through the pipes, their boxes scraping rhythmically on stone, collecting scraps of wire and rusted tins into little piles. Fish carried Izuku as always. The boy had grown used to these late-night outings, his tiny arms draped lazily around Fish's neck, his head turned with wide, curious eyes toward every dripping sound. From his perch, the tunnel seemed like an endless adventure. To him, night only meant family was together. He giggled softly when Shoes tripped over a pipe, sending sparks of laughter echoing through the hollow dark. But the laughter was what betrayed them. Down here came a voice, calm, low, controlled. The Boxtrolls froze as shadows shifted at the edge of the passage. Fish spun instantly, clutching Izuku closer against his chest. His wide eyes caught the flicker of a scarf unraveling like a serpent across the stones. Shota Aizawa stepped into the tunnel. His eyes glowed faintly red in the dim as his hair floated around his tired face, every inch of his body purposefully measured. "Put the child down," he said, voice even, but heavy with command. The Boxtrolls shrieked in alarm, scattering to press their bodies against the walls or huddle into their boxes like snapping turtles. Shoes scuttled to Fish's side, arms outspread as if his small, wiry frame could somehow defend both Izuku and his leader. Izuku blinked, startled by the sudden shift of tension. He blinked up at Aizawa with wide, wet eyes, then buried his face against Fish's chest with a whimper. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. "That child doesn't belong here." Scarf poised, he prepared to strike, but then Fish moved. He didn't brandish claws or teeth. He didn't lunge. Instead, the troll hunched low on his knees, curling protectively around the boy. His long arms formed a shelter, his box scraping against the floor as he leaned into a defensive posture that screamed not of violence, but of fear. Izuku let out a choked cry that silenced the cave. "No. Fish safe." "Fish." Aizawa faltered. Just for a moment. His scarf hovered, taut, every instinct screaming to react, but his rational eyes, trained to catch lies and manipulations, saw none in this scene. The creature before him wasn't holding a hostage. He was shielding a child. His gaze sharpened, confused. The boy's tiny hands clutched desperately at the troll's rough box, as though letting go of Fish was more terrifying than the hero looming overhead. "Why?" Aizawa muttered under his breath, his voice low. "Why would you protect him?" Fish, of course, gave no answer. He merely pressed his massive forehead gently against Izuku's crown, humming in that familiar low vibration that instantly calmed the child's sobs back into hiccups. Shadows and silence thickened as the Boxtrolls huddled closer, united, none daring to attack, their alarm muted into trembling but steadfast unity around their boy. Aizawa stood frozen longer than he should have. He could strike. He could bind the creature, take the boy, and end the confusion here and now. Yet his legs stayed rooted, dragged down by the odd, undeniable truth before him. Nothing in Fish's posture read as villainous. Nothing in Izuku's tight grasp suggested captivity. Nothing except the law demanded these two be separated. Finally, Aizawa's scarf recoiled slowly, sliding back across his shoulders. His jaw tightened, expression unreadable, before he stepped further into shadow. "The boy doesn't belong down here," he said softly, almost to himself. His red gaze flickered off, returning to its tired black. "And sooner or later you'll have to let him go." His footsteps faded. The cavern sat stunned, silence thick as fog. Izuku sniffled, still buried in Fish's chest. Gently, Fish rocked him, humming again, until the boy's fearful tremors softened into trust. United, the Boxtrolls stayed close that night, acutely aware. For the first time, danger had looked into their family and hesitated. Aizawa Shoda, on the other hand, sat perched on the rooftop of a crumbling warehouse, scarf draped loosely over one shoulder as the muted glow of dawn crept across the skyline. He hadn't gone home from patrol. Couldn't. The image refused to leave him. The creature Fish, if the markings on its box meant anything, hunched protectively over the child. The boy crying, but not away from the monster, toward it. The sound of that low hum, strange and guttural, but unmistakably soothing. It gnawed at him like a splinter in the skin. Duty told him it was simple: abducted child, odd creatures hiding underground, remove him and arrest them. A quirk mutation, a villain cell, call it what you want. It was clear-cut. But instinct, the same gut that had saved him countless times on the job, told him something uglier. Things weren't that simple. He'd seen fear in monsters before. He'd seen greed, cruelty, rage. But in Fish's eyes, in the trembling of those long hands wrapped carefully around the boy, he hadn't seen villainy. He'd seen something human. Human in a way that made his chest ache. Aizawa rubbed the bridge of his nose and muttered under his breath, "DM it." He would go back. He had to. Not just as a hero, but as someone who needed to understand. Meanwhile, deep underground, the Boxtrolls stirred slowly into their strange semblance of life. The aftermath of the encounters with both villains and heroes had left them cautious, quieter than ever. Some refused to stray far from the cavern. Others scavenged in shifts, darting through abandoned pipes like startled fish. Fish, more than any of them, bore the weight. Izuku wriggled in his lap with bright energy, humming nonsense to himself as he mimicked Fish's own deep tones. The child was growing quickly, words came easier, his awareness sharper, his curiosity impossible to contain. When he tugged on Fish's scarf of scraps and asked, "Up, sky?" with big expectant eyes, the troll's stomach twisted. He responded with a soft grumble, stroking the boy's hair, but the truth was harder to silence each day. Coal-smudged walls and scavenged toys could not replace sunlight or human teachers. A child like Izuku was not meant for sewers forever. The other Boxtrolls tried to help in the only ways they knew. Shoes laid out broken utensils, teaching Izuku to sort big from small, with dramatic claps when he got it right. Another troll demonstrated how gears spun, coaxing laughter when the boy made them wobble instead. For Izuku, these were games. For the trolls, they were desperate approximations of parenting. But the truth lingered in every corner: Izuku's cough when the sewer damp grew heavy, his pale cheeks in the half-light, the way he looked not at boxes, but at the cracks above where glimmers of the sun sometimes pierced through. Fish felt it the hardest. When Izuku pressed his coal-stained hand to Fish's broad chest and cooed, "Family," the troll's heart swelled with warmth and splintered with pain. He hummed back, curling protectively around the boy, but inside, ache hollowed him out. He wanted nothing more than to keep Izuku forever, to shield him, to raise him, to never let him out of arm's reach. But he knew. The boy was not a troll. He belonged to a world above that would never accept Fish. A world that wanted Fish destroyed and Izuku rescued. Fish cradled the boy as he drifted to sleep, humming until Izuku's small breaths settled steady against his chest. His eyes, large and sorrowful, stared upward where the pipes opened into cracks. The song he hummed trembled with a grief no words could hold. One day, this can't last. Above ground, Aizawa rested in that same dawn light, jaw tight, staring down into the drains. Below ground, Fish rocked Izuku gently, heart breaking at the truth he couldn't escape. And between them, invisible but inevitable, the line between family and duty blurred further than either could admit. The Boxtrolls had crept higher in the tunnels that night, scavenging from the refuse of market stalls and tossing scraps. Fish carried Izuku close, always close, his oversized arms wrapped around the boy even as the others darted and shuffled boldly. The grates above this part of the city opened into a quiet street where late dusk faded into lamplight. Through one of those grates, light spilled down warm and golden. And with it came the sound that froze Izuku in Fish's arms. Laughter. Not his own, not the trolls, not the strange cavern music they'd made together. The sharp, ringing laughter of children playing. Izuku pressed forward in Fish's grasp, his little face squished to the bars of the grate as he tried to see. Through the narrow slits, shadows danced, boys and girls kicking a ball across the cobbled road, shrieking in delight when it bounced high, tumbling into one another with carefree grins. Their shoes clattered loud, their voices pure. Izuku's eyes widened, lips parting in unrestrained wonder. His little hand reached instinctively upward through the grate. "Fish, play?" Fish's heart lurched. He pulled Izuku back immediately, clutching him tight before the boy could cry out louder. His eyes darted across the street. No one looked their way, but shadows always traveled fast. His rumbling hum came low, firm, meant to be final. And Izuku shook his head, tears pricking his eyes. "But, kids, me." His tiny fists pounded against Fish's box with a frustrated thud. "Baby play. Baby too." Fish's arms trembled as he rocked back into the shadows. His gaze stayed locked on the grate even as low groans of alarm rippled through the other trolls. He knew the truth. Izuku belonged up there. Continuing to keep him here was selfish, dangerous. But letting him go meant watching his boy walk into a world that would never understand what Fish was. Izuku sniffled, burying his face into Fish's chest. The troll's heart ached at the boy's muffled sob, "Baby, not same." Above, the world churned with its own rising tension. Reports of villains in the sewers grew louder every day. The Hero Commission, tired of whispers stretching too long without action, had begun tasking patrols with active sweeps into deeper tunnel systems. Aizawa, conflicted though he was, felt the noose tightening. If he didn't act, louder, harsher other heroes soon would. And in darker corners still, the villains who had failed to catch their beasts the first time liked their wounds and schemed. "They're worth a fortune if we get them alive," the sharp-eyed leader muttered, unfurling cages reinforced with steel. "This time, we don't go in light. This time, we flood the tunnels. Smoke, nets, chains, they'll have nowhere left to crawl." Both hunters prepared to descend, heroes out of mistaken duty, villains out of greed. All aimed their sights on the strange, scavenged family beneath their feet. Fish lingered beneath the grate long after Izuku quieted in his arms. His eyes followed the tiny shadows of children on the street, flickering under lantern light. And though he shook his head in warning again and again, a dread grew heavy in his chest. If the humans above were closing in, if Izuku longed for them as desperately as his tearful hand reaching through the bars, how long before Fish lost him forever? Fish pressed his forehead against the boy's, humming again despite the ache in his chest. Izuku relaxed, lulled by the sound, but above them children's laughter echoed, still proof of another life that belonged to him. For the first time, Fish admitted to himself the truth he'd been humming around for weeks. Hiding would not protect Izuku forever. And the choice whether to risk everything or lock down deeper would soon tear their fragile family apart. But then one day, Aizawa paused at the end of his alley patrol, footsteps soft over damp cobblestones. He'd stopped here every evening for the past week, a faded paper bag warm in his gloved hands. The alley was home to several stray cats, skittish creatures, rough around the edges, much like the city's forgotten children. Sometimes he brought scraps of chicken or fish. Sometimes just dry kibble and gentle words. The cats would slink out, eyes reflecting the distant glow, their guarded trust slowly melting into hesitant purrs. Tonight, as Aizawa knelt to pour fresh water into a battered dish, he let his mind wander. The feel of the city above was tense, like storm clouds heavy and waiting to break. His hand lingered on the back of a tawny kitten as it crept close, emboldened by his stillness. He stroked its fur in slow, thoughtful passes, and for a fleeting moment, the world felt simple. He hadn't realized the Boxtrolls were there watching in silence from the grated mouth of the storm drain. Fish crouched in the gloom, Izuku perched quietly beside him. The trolls watched, holding perfectly still. They had come including Izuku to understand fear of men. But in these quiet moments, as Aizawa cared for helpless creatures beneath the city's notice, their fear dulled just a fraction. Shoes, always antsy, stilled entirely when the hero knelt and murmured something low and gentle to a wary tomcat. Izuku's hand twitched against Fish's chest. "Cat," he whispered. Fish nodded, answering with a gentle hum. The trolls saw in Aizawa's actions a strange echo of their own, the careful tending, the refusal to harm, the way his voice was soft with the weak and wary. Aizawa had never known he was being watched by those he was hunting. Later that night, the world above and the world below began to move. The Hero Commission had finished waiting. Rumors of villain activity, lost supplies, kidnapped children and monsters beneath the city had stacked up too high for patience. Pro-heroes Aizawa among them were assigned to sweep the tunnels. Aizawa accepted the order without protest, but unease throbbed in his chest. He recalled those small hands, clinging to strange claws, and the laughter that had not sounded like that of a hostage. Meanwhile, the villains with nets reinforced, smoke bombs packed, and a burning grudge in their hearts chose the same night to strike, slipping through forgotten maintenance doors and cracked manholes. Their target was profit, nothing more, box creatures for the underground market, and the rare, valuable human child at the center. The sewers grew thick with echoes, footfalls, shouts, and the muttering of villains muffled by the drip of damp air. The Boxtrolls sensed everything at once. Fish's box nearly rattled with worry as he scooped Izuku up. Shoes darted to his side, baring teeth, while the others pressed close to form a living shield around their child. They scampered for deeper darkness and hidden alcoves, but the tunnels were no longer safe. Smoke rolled in. Flashlights strobed across brickwork. Heroes shouted commands, misunderstood what they found. Nets tangled with chains, Boxtrolls fleeing with frantic, guttural cries, villains swinging cages and clubs in the chaos. Lights flickered on Fish's battered label as he bundled Izuku behind his box. The boy's wide eyes shimmered in the confusion, not just terror, but the ache of longing he could still hear, faintly above the chaos, the children's laughter from earlier that day. He could see the gentleness in Aizawa's hands that morning as a kitten nuzzled his palm. A net whistled through the air of villains' toss only for a hero's scarf to snap it aside. "Back off!" Aizawa's voice echoed, sharp as he shot through the swirling mass. He landed between two snarling villains, erasing quirks with a single glare. But his eyes, in the chaos, found Fish's massive shape and the small human he'd come to recognize. For a fracturing second, their eyes met Aizawa's steady, conflicted, Fish's wide, pleading. Izuku's hand reached up, gripping Fish's wrist, voice trembling. "Fish! Please!" All around, Boxtrolls fought not with force but with teamwork, darting in to grab Izuku, to knock over cages, to shield their own from club and chain. Shoes braved a villain's boot to leap onto his arm, biting and hissing behind his oversized ears. Above them, the surface world roared oblivious, But in the shadows a battle was being fought not for profit or law, but for the tiny beating core of family. Aizawa made his choice. He stepped between villain and troll, scarf cracking like thunder, disarming a man in a mask and sending him sprawling. He did not chase Fish or wrench Izuku from his arms. Instead, his voice was low, grudgingly gentle amidst the tempest. "Run! Take him! Go!" Fish stared one instant longer. Then, with Boxtrolls swarming close, he scrambled deeper into the pipes, Izuku clinging to his neck, tears bright but trust absolute. Heroes would claim they had driven villains out that night. Villains nursed wounds and curses, plotting already for a next attempt. But in the tight, trembling heart of the sewers, Fish and the trolls counted survival not in battles won, but in another day together, the echo of Aizawa's choice lingering in the darkness, neither enemy nor friend. And soon the sewers were quiet again. Too quiet. The Boxtrolls huddled together in their cavern, bruises still fresh from the clash. Nets and chains lay abandoned in corners where they'd been cut free after tangling one of their own. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, acrid and oppressive. They had survived but barely. Izuku sat in Fish's lap, his little arms clinging gently to the troll's thick neck. His eyes were red from crying, his voice still hoarse. But there was something new there too, glinting through the sobs and exhaustion. A whisper of recognition. When Fish combed his claws carefully through the boy's messy curls, Izuku lifted his head. "Man help," he said softly, with words not yet whole but heavy with meaning. His small hands waved vaguely, mimicking scarf-like motions as he murmured, "Safe, man." Fish stiffened. The other Boxtrolls froze where they sat, their heads jerking about in disbelief. Fish's hum turned low and uncertain, his gaze troubled. Aizawa had helped. Not much, but enough, turning away the worst of the villains, his scarf cutting down nets instead of winding around Izuku. He hadn't taken the boy. He had said only one word before leaving: "Run." This unsettled everything. That night, the clan gathered at the deepest part of their cavern. No child's giggles accompanied them this time. Izuku was set on a pile of scavenged cloth, drowsy but watching with wide eyes. The trolls crowded around in a crooked circle. Their guttural murmurs rose in waves, hands flailing and boxes thumping against one another. Disjointed, emotional, yet a language of sorts. One troll pounded his chest, a gesture clear as words: "He is ours. We keep him." Another flailed toward the ceiling above, mimicking chains and nets. His eyes widened, his voice sharp with warning: "The humans will never stop. Keeping him means they destroy us all." The circle split. Some hummed low, siding with keeping the boy beneath their protection. Others screeched, their head shakes frantic, demanding they release him before he brought ruin. Izuku shrank against the wall, his tiny fist to his mouth. His green eyes shimmered. He didn't understand their words, but he knew the tone. They were talking about him. Shoes scuttled quickly to his side, flopping in dramatic comfort and tugging playfully at his arm. Izuku smiled weakly, but his voice cracked with fear as he called out, "Fish!" Fish froze mid-debate. His massive frame turned, drawn the way a compass needle finds north. Izuku reached out to him, trembling but certain. "Stay, family. Fish, stay." The cavern went silent. Fish's heart squeezed tight, the weight almost unbearable. His people's eyes bore into him, each one waiting, demanding leadership. But inside, Fish broke. Every instinct told him the boy belonged to the sunlit world above. Yet every heartbeat, every small handprint smeared across his box, screamed that Izuku belonged with him. And Fish did not know how to choose between survival and love. Up above, Aizawa leaned against a lamppost, his tired eyes hidden beneath his scarf. A report burned in his pocket, demanding he confirm what he'd seen below the streets: a cluster of dangerous entities keeping a child. The commission wanted results, not questions. But his mind replayed the scene, that creature shielding the boy, the tremor in its hum, the fear in its eyes that wasn't violence but desperation. And the child, clinging like letting go would shatter him. Calling the creature family. Aizawa muttered, voice low, half a vow, half a surrender: "I won't let him become a victim to either side." If I have to break every rule to pull him into the light safely, I'll do it. He poured more dry kibble into the alley bowl for the strays, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had seen something the others hadn't. Monsters didn't protect like that. Monsters didn't earn a child's trust like that. And he was running out of time to prove it. In the underground, Fish held Izuku close, forehead pressed softly against the human child's. The air around them hummed with unspoken choice, every troll waiting for direction. Fish's eyes burned with the weight of both worlds. A father's heart told him to keep the boy in his arms forever. But somewhere deeper, a painful truth whispered, to save Izuku, something had to change. The line between love and loss grew thinner. And as the days after the clash settled into a fragile peace, the air underground was different. The Boxtrolls went about their scavenging with hushed care, constantly glancing toward the pipes. Shadows stretched longer, water dripped heavier, and Izuku's laughter once endless had quieted into short bursts, softer now, like even he sensed the world around him holding its breath. Fish carried the silence inside him. Every tremor in the distant tunnels, every murmur above their cavern, reminded him, the humans weren't done. Heroes and villains alike had seen them now. It was only a matter of time. For nights, the trolls had argued, gestures sharp, boxes thumping in discord. To keep Izuku or to let him go. Most screeched in fear. He will bring danger until none of us survive. Others clung stubbornly to the boy's handprints on the walls, pointing to them over and over as if they were proof. He is family. He belongs here. Fish said little. He only held Izuku closer each night, listening to the boy's whispers against his chest. But inside, the thought no longer left him. His wide eyes reflected not just the child in his arms, but the shape of the underground hero he had seen, the one whose scarf unraveled like a snake, who fought both villain and troll alike, but whose eyes had hesitated. That hesitation haunted Fish. It might mean danger. It might mean hope. And Fish didn't know which one was worse. Perhaps Fish felt it approaching, that moment when a decision could no longer be buried. Perhaps that was why he gave Izuku the best day he could remember, even within damp walls. They began the morning with play. Izuku scrambled onto Fish's broad back, squealing with joy as the troll scampered across the cavern like a great lopsided beast of burden. Shoes scuttled ahead, waving a stick like a banner, cheering as if leading a parade. Izuku clung tight, laughing so loudly that it bound every troll into smiles of their own strange shape. Fish! Izuku called like a king to his steed, bouncing as Fish leapt over puddles. Fly! Fish, fly! Fish rumbled deep in his chest, bounding higher as Izuku shrieked in delight. This was laughter unbroken by fear, pure, childish joy, and he carried it like treasure. Later, they shared food scavenged from the markets above. A bruised pear, a shard of bread, a scattering of nuts. The trolls watched with quiet reverence as Fish broke each piece carefully, handing the softest bits to Izuku before taking any for himself. Izuku grinned, stuffing pieces into Fish's huge mouth in return, his giggles echoing as trolls mimicked in play, passing scraps in silly circles until it became a feast of laughter more than food. As the day waned, Izuku began to tire. His small body slumped against Fish's arms, eyes heavy but refusing to close, too stubborn to end what had been a perfect day. Fish lowered him gently to their patchwork bed of rags and cloth, tucking him in with care unusual for hands so ungainly. Izuku reached out, grabbing Fish's finger tightly, unwilling to let go. His voice was drowsy, but insistent. Say, Fish, stay, family. The Boxtroll's heart splintered. He bent low, pressing his forehead against the boy's curls, humming the melody that meant safety, love, forever. The boy's eyes finally fluttered closed, trust unbroken, a tiny smile lingering even in sleep. Fish remained hunched over him long after. Watching, guarding, memorizing every detail as though the moment could be his last. When Izuku finally slept, the trolls gathered. Their murmurs rose again, sharper this time, hands slashing air, boxes thudding in rhythm like drums of argument. Half shrieked and groaned, "We can't keep him. The humans will kill us. Too much danger. He must go." Others growled and flopped against the coal-marked wall, banging on Izuku's handprints, pounding them like proof, We are family. He is ours, ours forever. Only one sat silent, Fish. The circle tilted toward him, eyes demanding decision. They were his to lead. They knew it. He knew it. It was Fish who found the boy. Fish who raised him, soothed him, shielded him. His choice would bind all of them. Fish's gaze dropped to Izuku, curled small beneath his scraps of cloth. He saw every bruise the tunnels left on him, every cough the damp air brought, every bright gleam in his eyes when he glimpsed children through the grate. He saw, too, Aizawa feeding cats above, hands steady, voice soft. He closed his eyes. His hum began low, trembling, before rising into steady vibration. The trolls quieted, listening. Their language was wordless, but it carried. We cannot keep him underground forever. We cannot lose him either. We have family, but for him to live, we may need help. The cave rattled with alarmed screeches. Hands flailed. No troll trusted humans. Hands clawed across throats in denial, warnings rasped of cages, chains, fire. Fish's answer was softer, stronger. He curled a hand around Izuku's tiny fingers, still gripping even in sleep, and held them up for the clan to see. His hum deepened, guttural and raw, echoing against the stone. Family means we choose the path that keeps him breathing. Even if it hurts us. Even if it means trusting a human. The trolls hushed in shock. Some trembled, some whined, some pressed their claws to their boxes as if holding themselves together. But slowly, one by one, they lowered their heads. Survival they understood. Family they couldn't deny. And Izuku, their boy, was worth all of it. Fish bowed his head low, tucking Izuku close once more. His hum trembled now, aching with certainty and sorrow. The path had split. The family would take it together. And far above, unaware of the decision made for him, Aizawa walked the rooftops, already seeking a way to reach into the shadows before time ran out. The night was heavy, the air damp with a weight that pressed down more than the sewer stones. The Boxtrolls moved together as one, boxes scraping in nervous rhythm, feet shuffling toward the faint glow of moonlight that filtered through a storm drain opening into a forgotten alley. At their center was Fish, his arms wrapped firmly but tenderly around Izuku. The boy was drowsy against him, cheek pressed to the troll's chest, but even as he stirred in confusion, his fingers twisted into Fish's collar. He knew something was wrong. The hum beneath Fish's chest was too soft, too broken. It carried not safety this time, but sorrow. The other trolls followed, heads bowed, their guttural murmurs low with grief. This was not a scavenging trip. This was not playtime. This felt like the end. Above, Aizawa waited. His tired eyes scanned the shadows, scarf loose around his shoulders. He had patrolled here as he always did, but tonight he had felt them drawing closer. For the first time, he hadn't approached them to strike. He had waited. Fish's wide eyes met his through the bars of the grate. The clan hesitated, pressed close in fear, but Fish stepped forward, pushing the storm cover away with awkward strength. The Boxtrolls spilled into the alley, strange shapes illuminated by moonlight, their hulking boxes and shuffling bodies out of place in the human world. Aizawa tensed, ready, yet made no move. His instincts screamed to protect, to fight, but there was no malice in the air, only grief. Fish approached slowly, each step heavy, until the two stood a few feet apart. Izuku stirred again, now awake, blinking against the light. When his eyes settled and he saw the man, confusion blossomed. Then dread. He clutched tighter at Fish's box. No. Fish, stay. No. His voice was sharp, panicked, trembling with desperation. Fish's heart cracked. His hum wavered, but still he crouched low, lifting Izuku gently up higher, toward the man before him. The boy tried to cling tighter, but Fish's massive hands were careful, prying little fingers loose one by one. Aizawa, silent, reached forward. His hands were steady, but his face betrayed the weight of what he was being given. Not a rescued hostage, not stolen spoils, but a child, being handed over by a family that had loved him fiercely. Izuku thrashed, tears spilling. Fish! Fish! His cries sharpened the air, cutting through every troll present. They trembled, boxes rattling, but none moved forward. They knew what this meant. Fish pressed his great forehead against Izuku's one last time, letting the boy's tears smear across the rough cardboard. His hum deepened, shaking, a final song of comfort. Then, softly, his broken voice rumbled a word, one of the very few he had mastered. Stay. Not a command. A plea. Izuku sobbed harder as Fish's hands lowered him, transferring his small body into Aizawa's waiting arms. The boy squirmed to reach back, little arms outstretched toward Fish even as the hero held him firmly. Fish! His scream echoed against cold stone. The trolls lowered their heads together, guttural murmurs threading with grief. Shoes hid his face behind his box, body shaking. The others clung to one another, murmuring as though to steady the loss with unity. Fish stepped back, trembling. His eyes lingered on the boy, his boy, for one eternal heartbeat. Then he slowly turned, retreating into the shadows, each step heavier than the last. The other trolls followed, reluctant but resolute, vanishing again into the world below. Izuku's cries echoed after them until at last his voice grew hoarse. His small fists clung now to Aizawa's scarf, eyes wide with anguish as the drain closed over the last glimpse of his family. Above-ground silence returned, broken only by Izuku's broken sobs and the steady hum of Aizawa's low reassurance. But the hum was different, human. Not as deep, not as raw, but an echo. Enough to remind Izuku that though one life was ending, another was beginning. And in the shadows below, Fish curled against the cold stone, voice rumbling on the word he had given his boy. Stay. A vow. A hope. A farewell. The alley was still again. Moonlight stretched pale across damp stone where, only moments before, lives had shifted forever. Izuku clung desperately to Aizawa's scarf, his tiny body heaving with ragged sobs. His cries for Fish echoed raw in the night, the heartbreak of a child being torn from one family into the arms of another. Aizawa held him firmly, not harsh but steady, guarding him against the night air as if even a gust of wind might steal the boy away. His tired eyes followed the sewer grate one last time where the shadows and trembling eyes of the Boxtroll clan had disappeared. And for the first time in years, Aizawa felt something he could not dismiss as instinct or reason. He had expected monsters. But what he saw in Fish's final gaze was not malice. Not villainy. Only grief unspoken and a father's desperate plea. It stopped him cold. Fish had not fought. He had not clung or attacked. He had only lowered the boy into Aizawa's arms, but not without saying it, without asking it, without begging it. His massive eyes, wet and wide, had carried the words he could not speak. Protect him. Keep him safe. Love him as we did. Aizawa tightened his hold around Izuku, watching as the boy reached his tiny arm outward toward the grate long after it had been sealed by darkness. His sobs quieted into hiccups, exhaustion tugging him toward sleep, but even then, his small lips whispered the name over and over. Fish. Fish. Aizawa closed his eyes briefly. He lowered his forehead against the boy's curls, speaking low, his gravelly voice rough but gentler than he had ever let it become on patrol. I'll protect you. I swear. The words felt heavier than any oath of heroics, heavier than any mission he had carried in his years. This was not about law or duty or reputation. This was a promise driven into him by the look in a creature's eyes, a father relinquishing his child not to fate, not to failure, but to trust. A silent plea he would honor. As the night drew on, Aizawa stepped from the alley into the quiet city streets, Izuku held close and guarded against his chest. The boy sniffled once more, murmuring Fish, one last time before sleep claimed him at last. Aizawa's arms tightened instinctively around him. His gaze cut back briefly at the empty grate, his thoughts sharp and heavy. They trusted me tonight and I won't betray that. And with those words, he vanished into the shadows of the city carrying not only a child, but the vow born from monster's eyes. Aizawa's apartment was quiet. Always had been. The walls were bare, the furniture simple and sparse. Silence was what he lived in, what he needed. But now, for the first time, that silence felt too heavy, too sharp around the edges. The boy in his arms sniffled softly, half asleep but still clinging with tiny fists at his scarf. Izuku's eyes blinked open as Aizawa closed the door behind them. The apartment was dim, its only light a small desk lamp left burning on a cluttered table. To Izuku, it was unfamiliar, strange, wrong. "Fish," he whimpered weakly, twisting to look back as though the family he had lost might still be waiting at the door. Aizawa crouched, setting the child gently on the couch. He kept his tone low, steady, forcing softness into words that came rough by nature. "They're not here. But you're safe now." Izuku's lip quivered. His little hands clutched at the blanket Aizawa draped over him, tugging it desperately to his chin. Tears welled fresh, not from fear of this stranger, but from the hollow ache of absence. "Family," he whispered, voice cracked. Aizawa sat heavily in the chair across from him, fighting his own silence. He wasn't a man of speeches. But the boy's grief pressed into him, and for once, words came. "They gave you to me," he said finally. "They asked me to protect you. I won't let them down. Or you." Izuku blinked at him. His wide eyes shimmered at those words, not fully understanding but sensing enough. Slowly, the boy's sobs softened. He curled against the blanket, gaze flicking between the strange man and the door, until at last sleep tugged him under. The days that followed were not easy. Izuku woke often at night, crying for fish, for shoes, for the family he knew. Aizawa would find him huddled by the door, tiny hands tugging at the handle as though trying to crawl back down into the sewers. He would kneel beside him, pulling him close, grumbling softly against his tangled hair. "You're not alone. I've got you." At first, there was only resistance. Tears, fear, vacant stares. But slowly bonds formed in the small cracks between grief. Aizawa cooked simple meals. Izuku would poke hesitantly at the food, then open up when Aizawa leaned back to let him eat without pressure. They pieced together little routines, brushing messy curls, trading soft hums at bedtime. Aizawa's voice clumsy, but steady, echoing the rhythm of the troll's lullaby Izuku missed. One evening, while crouched to tie the boy's tiny shoes before a walk, Aizawa felt Izuku's small fingers curl into his hair. The child leaned forward, unthinking, and whispered. The word froze him. Aizawa looked up, eyes heavy, his breath stalled. Izuku blinked shyly, uncertain, but then buried his face into the man's shoulder with quiet trust. And for the first time, something in Aizawa's chest cracked, not with grief, but with fierce, unshakable resolve. He wrapped an arm around the boy, tugging him close. His voice was rough, but softer than he had ever let it become. "Yeah, I'm here." From that day, it was no longer duty, nor promise, nor silence that bound them. Aizawa Shota became what Fish had begged of him in silence. Not simply a guardian, but a father. And though Izuku's eyes still sometimes looked to shadows, longing for the family he had lost, he began to learn this truth too. Love, in its many forms, could choose him more than once. But down below the bustling streets of the city, the cavern felt hollow without him. Coal drawings still lined the walls, handprints small and large pressed side by side. Smudges shaped into crooked figures and clumsy suns. They remained like ghosts, like laughter caught forever on stone. Yet in the silence of the cavern, they mocked more than comforted. The Boxtrolls were restless. Shoes scuttled about noisily, dragging scraps only to drop them, muttering unhappily into his box. Others huddled together, their guttural voices rising in uncertain hums, as if afraid sound alone might make the cavern collapse into silence. It wasn't just the absence of the boy. It was the absence of the hum that had come with him, those squeals of delight, those soft whispers at bedtime, that undeniable sense of family that the Boxtrolls had never known until Izuku. Now that warmth was gone, and the cavern was cold. Fish stayed apart from the others. His large hands rested heavily on his knees, his wide eyes fixed on the coal handprint Izuku had made, small and perfect beside his own. He pressed one clawed fingertip against it, tracing the mark as though by some miracle, the child might answer back. But there was no answer. His chest rumbled with a hum low and heavy, one the others were too afraid to join. It was grief and longing and something else, a tether he could not let go. Still, Fish did not retreat fully into the earth as before. Each night, when the others scurried deeper, he crept upward. Silent, cautious, through pipes and drains until his hulking box pressed close to the edge of street or rooftop shadow. Wide eyes flickered, watching. He had no words to describe what drove him. Only a need. From the darkness, Fish saw them, the man with tired eyes and the child in his arms. Aizawa did not coddle. He did not blur into play as the trolls once had, but he was steady. He fed the boy. He wrapped him in blankets. He let Izuku's tiny fists clutch at his scarf until sleep soothed him. From the shadows, Fish saw Izuku laugh again, not the same wild, squealing laugh as in the sewers, but small, timid, growing stronger with time spent beside the man. Fish saw Aizawa bend to brush the boy's curls back, saw his hand hover with indecision before resting firm and protective against the child's shoulder. The Boxtrolls' chest quaked faintly. That silent plea had not gone unanswered. Shoes followed him once, crouching beside to peek through the grate. His squeak was one of awe and sadness both. The others gathered, too, whispering nervously, watching for proof that their boy was loved. And each night, when Izuku's voice called faintly from above, sometimes still, Fish, sometimes, the trolls trembled. Their guttural murmurs rose softly, like an echo between stone. As if they could answer him, even if he would never hear it again. Fish lingered longest. He could not leave, not while doubt remained. His large eyes followed every small detail. Aizawa's arms pulling Izuku close during a nightmare, his measured patience when tears came, the way he never once left the boy unattended. And when finally Izuku slept safe in those arms, Fish bowed his head, forehead pressed against the cold edge of a grate. His hum vibrated faintly into the night, a wordless wish that drifted like shadow. For as long as he watched, he knew the truth of it. The man had not broken his vow. Izuku was safe. But still, the coal handprint remained on stone, and Fish's claw lingered on it each dawn, as if to remind even himself, family does not vanish. It lingers. It waits. Even in shadows. By the time Izuku turned 5, the apartment was no longer as quiet as it once had been. There were scribbles taped clumsily to the fridge, shaky little drawings of heroes with capes far too big, alongside smiley boxes with round eyes. His tiny shoes sat lined under the coat rack, sprawled beside Aizawa's boots. Even the air carried something new, the sound of toys clattering, pencils scratching, and the childish laughter of someone who had learned what safety felt like. Izuku smiled more easily now, though sometimes shyly, ducking behind Aizawa's scarf when strangers spoke to him. He had grown used to hot meals, bedtime stories spoken in a voice rough but steady, mornings spent brushing crumbs from the kitchen table while cats peeked curiously from the window. This life with Aizawa, steady and simple, wrapped him in security he didn't question anymore. And yet, sometimes, when nights grew quiet and the apartment darkened, Izuku would tilt his head and wonder. He remembered laughter echoing against damp stone. He remembered great arms wrapping him close, humming so deep the sound rattled his small chest. He remembered blackened handprints smeared proudly across stone walls and a voice clumsy, guttural, but real saying stay. The memories clung to him like the shadows of a dream. Sometimes they felt impossibly far away, like his mind had invented them in loneliness. Even when he traced pictures of a big box with arms and scribbled the word, fish, across the paper, part of him wondered if this family he remembered had been real, or if his child's imagination had made it all up. But then he'd tug unconsciously at Aizawa's scarf, clutching it the way he once clutched thick scraps of cardboard, and the comfort would return. It didn't matter if the trolls were still out there in the dark or not. Because they had been real once, he was sure. They had loved him. And now, Aizawa loved him too. All the while Aizawa watched this growth in quiet silence, though within him it stirred more than he let on. The boy was smaller than most 5-year-olds, soft-cheeked and wide-eyed, but there was steel hidden already in his gaze, something kind but unyielding. Something inherited not from blood, but from being chosen, again and again. At times, Aizawa caught him pressing his small hand against windows, leaving smudges like coal prints. Or humming softly to himself at night, not a tune Shota had ever taught him. Each time, the hero's chest tightened. He knew those echoes of family were still alive in the boy, no matter how much time passed. And privately, as he leaned against the doorframe to watch Izuku drift to sleep, Aizawa would whisper the same words he had once vowed in the alley that night. "I'll protect you." Izuku never stirred, but sometimes, in dreams, he thought he heard a deeper hum beneath those words, a voice rumbling from shadows, from memory, from love that had never really left. Then one day, as the neighborhood playground was alive with sound, children shouting, swings squeaking, the dull thud of soccer ball bouncing across the packed dirt. Izuku, only 5, ran among them with more energy than Aizawa expected, his small green curls bouncing with each step. Shota leaned against the fenced edge, scarf looped loosely around his shoulders, his usual tired expression softened, not quite a smile, but something close as he watched the boy he'd come to call his son. But as Izuku paused to catch his breath at the edge of the sandbox, his wide eyes drifted, drawn not to the children, but to the line of trees just beyond the playground. The shadows beneath them were deeper than they should have been, shapes pressed low against the gray dusk. At first, they seemed like tricks of the eye. But then pale eyes blinked within the gloom. Izuku's breath caught. His little heart pounded fast and bright, recognition surging where memory had never truly let go. "Fish," he whispered. The shadows shifted. A familiar hulking shape leaned forward, box edges glinting faintly in the fading light, long arms pressed into the earth. Behind him, smaller figures peeked nervously, a cluster of old friends, still watching, still waiting. They had come to see their boy again. Izuku's eyes filled with tears before joy burst free. His small arms waved frantically, hands smeared with dust from play. "Fish! Fish!" he shouted, loud, high, happy. The trolls startled at the sound, hissing nervously as the other children turned curiously at Izuku's cry, but Fish did not retreat. His gaze held steady, unblinking, long eyes sorrowful and full of love. Izuku turned immediately, legs pumping as he sprinted across the playground. "Daddy! Daddy!" he cried, his voice full of excitement, not fear. "It's Fish, Daddy! Fish!" Aizawa pushed from the fence quickly, scanning the treeline with sharp eyes. At first, he saw nothing, just the silhouettes of leaves stirring in the wind. But then, the shapes shifted deeper into the dark, and for half a heartbeat he saw it too, broad box, glowing eyes, still watching. Izuku tugged on his father's sleeve, bouncing with glee. "See, Daddy? See! Fish!" His wide smile radiated certainty. The shadows had already begun to retreat. One by one the trolls vanished, slipping back into the earth they knew, quick as whispers. Only Fish lingered a moment longer, his massive eyes fixed not just on Izuku, but on Aizawa. A plea silent, sorrowful, but trusting. Aizawa held the boy close, one hand steady on his small shoulder. He gave the faintest nod toward the trees, almost imperceptible, though Fish seemed to understand. The troll's form melted at last into darkness, leaving only the rustle of fading steps. Izuku leaned against his father, eyes still bright with wonder. "They came back," he whispered proudly. "Fish still here." Aizawa looked down at him, a rare softness flickering across his gaze. He brushed a rough hand gently against Izuku's curls. "They never really left, kid," he murmured. But as Izuku stared hard into the shadows, little chest rising and falling with the force of hope and longing. Where Fish had stood a heartbeat ago, there was now only empty dusk and the faint ripple of leaves. The other Boxtrolls had vanished, too quiet as the gentle love that still warmed his memories. "Daddy, where did they go?" Izuku's voice trembled, joy and sorrow tangled tight. Aizawa knelt beside him, steady hand on the boy's shoulder. His eyes searched the trees, seeing nothing but knowing, somehow, exactly what mattered. "They had to go, Izuku. But it doesn't mean they're gone forever." Izuku sniffled, brushing at his cheeks. "Will I see them again?" Aizawa drew him close, pressing Izuku against his side where the world felt safe. His answer was gentle, as sure as any promise he'd ever made. "One day you will. Those who love us always find their way back, maybe not right away, but when the time is right. I'll be with you until then, okay?" Izuku blinked up at him. Tears still glimmered in his green eyes, but his smile was brave bright, because Aizawa believed. "Okay," he whispered, trusting as only a child can. They stayed like that a moment, the city's lights flickering on around them, the playground echoing with voices and dreams. Above, clouds shifted and parted, sending a band of gold to sweep across the ground. Izuku squeezed Aizawa's hand, turning once more to the trees with hope shining clear in his eyes. Goodbye, fish. See you soon. And deep in the fading shadows, though he could not see them, he felt it a warmth, an echo, a promise. Until we meet again.